The venue was absolutely perfect. The Rosewood Manor, a historic estate with manicured gardens and a grand ballroom that felt like stepping into another century. Ivory linens, blush-colored roses, crystal chandeliers casting warm light across the room where 600 guests were seated, waiting. The string quartet was playing a soft rendition of Debussy. Everything had been planned to perfection for 18 months. Everything except for the moment when my mother-in-law, Patricia Hartwell, stood up from her front row seat and announced to the entire gathering that I was not worthy of her son, and that this wedding should never happen. My name is Sophie Chen Hartwell. I'm 29 years old. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood where my parents worked constantly to provide stability. My mother was a nurse. My father was a teacher. They instilled in me the values of hard work, kindness, and integrity. I studied business at Columbia and spent 7 years building my own event planning company from the ground up. By 28, I had one of the most successful firms in the city. I'd planned weddings for celebrities, corporate executives, and members of prominent families. I was used to managing chaos. I was used to being the calm in the storm. I was used to handling crisis situations with grace and professionalism. What I wasn't prepared for was the calculated cruelty of my future mother-in-law. The relationship between Patricia and me had always been tense, though I didn't understand why. When I first started dating Michael, her son, she seemed pleasant enough, cordial, if distant. But as our relationship deepened, as it became clear that Michael and I were building something real, Patricia's demeanor shifted. She made subtle comments about my background. She questioned my intentions. She implied that I was marrying for opportunity, rather than for love. She suggested that I wasn't the right fit for the Hartwell family, a family with old money, old connections, and old expectations about who their sons should marry. Michael was wonderful about it. He defended me constantly. He told his mother that her opinions didn't matter, that he loved me, and that she needed to accept our relationship. But her disapproval was like a constant, low-level hum of hostility. It was exhausting. When Michael proposed, a beautiful, intimate moment on a rooftop overlooking Central Park, I was thrilled, but I was also anxious. I knew what came next. I knew that planning our wedding would be a battleground, with Patricia wanting to control every detail. I was right. The anxiety started almost immediately. I'd experienced generalized anxiety disorder since my early 20s, but I'd learned to manage it with therapy, meditation, and exercise. However, wedding planning triggered something deeper. The perfectionism. The pressure. The feeling that this one day had to be flawless. I found myself checking details obsessively. I couldn't sleep. I had constant knots in my stomach. I started having panic attacks about things that seemed insignificant, whether the napkins were the right shade of blush, whether the band would play the right songs, whether everyone would enjoy the food. My therapist, Dr. Margaret Stevens, recommended that I take a step back and reframe my thinking. This isn't about perfection, she told me during one of our sessions. This is about celebrating your commitment to Michael. The day doesn't need to be flawless. It needs to be genuine. I started practicing self-care more deliberately. I delegated more tasks to my event planning team. I attended therapy twice a week. I did meditation apps before bed. I tried to breathe through the anxiety rather than resist it. Michael was incredibly supportive. He saw how much I was struggling, and he wanted to help however he could. Patricia saw something entirely different. She decided my anxiety was an opportunity. The turning point came 3 weeks before the wedding. I was having a particularly difficult day, one of those days where the anxiety felt suffocating, where everything felt like it was going wrong, where I could barely leave my bed. Michael had gone to his office for a few hours. I'd called in my assistant to help manage some last-minute details, while I tried to settle my nervous system. That's when my mother-in-law showed up at my apartment. She told my assistant that she wanted to see the wedding dress, something that was supposed to remain a secret until the ceremony. My assistant was uncomfortable, but didn't want to be rude, so she let Patricia into the bedroom where the dress was hanging in a garment bag. What Patricia did next was calculated sabotage. She took the dress down from the rack. She laid it out on the bed. And then she systematically destroyed it. She cut the delicate lace veil into strips. She ripped the hem of the gown. She used a permanent marker to write obscenities across the bodice. She tore the train completely off. She made it unwearable. All of it in less than 10 minutes. When she was finished, she left a note: "You will never be good enough for this family. This dress is ruined, just like you're ruining my son's life. Love, Mother." My assistant found her sitting in the rubble of my destroyed dress, and she called me immediately. I was sitting in my therapist's office, in the middle of an emergency session, when I got the call. Dr. Stevens watched my face as I listened to the description of what had happened. "The dress is destroyed," my assistant said, her voice shaking. "I don't know who did this, but there's a note. I think it was your mother-in-law. She was here maybe 15 minutes ago." I tried to stop her, but I don't remember much of the next hour. I know I left my therapist's office in a state of shock. I know Dr. Stevens called after me, offering to increase my support. I know I drove to my apartment with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I saw the dress, what remained of it, I thought I would fall apart. The dress had been custom designed by an Italian designer. It had taken 6 months to create. It cost more than my first car. It was supposed to be preserved as a family heirloom. It was destroyed. But more importantly, it was a violation. It was a woman entering my space and deliberately, methodically destroying something precious to me, with the express purpose of destabilizing me before the most important day of my life. I called the police and filed a report for property destruction. I called Michael and told him what had happened. His response was immediate and furious. He went to his mother's house and confronted her directly. She denied everything at first, but eventually she admitted it. She said I deserved it. She said I was bad for Michael. She said she was trying to force me to cancel the wedding so Michael would see who I really was. Michael was devastated. His mother had always been difficult, but this crossed a line. He was prepared to cut contact with her entirely. But I wasn't ready to let it go that easily. I'm an event planner. My entire career is built on managing crisis and finding solutions. And I'm also someone who learned a long time ago that sometimes the best way to win is to stay quiet, document everything, and move strategically. Here's what I did. First, I filed a police report and provided photographs of the destroyed dress. The police confirmed that there was sufficient evidence to charge Patricia with criminal mischief and destruction of property. The prosecutor moved forward with charges. Second, I documented everything. I had the dress professionally photographed by a forensic photographer, who could document the damage and provide expert assessment of the cost of repair versus replacement. I obtained copies of the police report. I had my assistant provide a written statement of what she witnessed. I secured the note Patricia had left, which was now entered into evidence. Third, I reached out to the designer. The Italian designer, Giuseppe Mancini, was outraged when I explained what had happened. He not only provided documentation of the cost of the dress, $92,000, but he also offered to completely remake the dress at no charge, as a gesture of solidarity. He said in his 30 years as a designer, he'd never encountered such deliberate cruelty. Fourth, I contacted a civil attorney and filed a lawsuit against Patricia for the full value of the destroyed dress, plus punitive damages for the emotional distress and the deliberate sabotage designed to destabilize me before my wedding. Patricia's attorney sent a cease and desist letter. But it was a hollow move. The evidence was irrefutable. She'd destroyed the dress. She'd left a threatening note. She'd admitted it to her son. The police had filed charges. There was nowhere to hide. Then I made my strategic move. I reached out to Michael's father, Richard Hartwell, and explained the situation in detail. Richard was a successful businessman, a man who understood consequences and accountability. I presented him with the photographs, the police report, the designer's documentation, and the note. I explained that while Michael wanted to protect his mother, I believed that accountability was important, not to be punitive, but because unchecked behavior like this would only escalate. Richard was appalled. He'd always respected me, but this incident elevated that respect to something deeper. He saw me as someone who was choosing to handle an incredibly difficult situation with maturity and strategic thinking rather than emotional reactivity. He called an emergency family meeting, just Michael, Patricia, Richard, and myself. This was the confrontation that changed everything. Richard laid out what Patricia had done. He presented the evidence. He explained that she'd committed a crime. He told her that her behavior was unacceptable and that there would be consequences. Patricia immediately cycled through the emotional states I'd predicted. First came anger. She's not good enough for Michael. I was trying to protect him. Then came manipulation. I was just upset. I didn't mean to actually destroy it. I was trying to scare her. Finally came begging, please, I'm sorry. I'll pay for the dress. I'll do anything. Just don't press charges. Please don't let this destroy our family. Michael was devastated. He looked at his mother like he was seeing her for the first time, and what he saw was a woman so insecure and controlling that she would destroy something precious to someone she claimed to love. Mom, he said quietly, I need you to understand something. If you don't face the consequences of what you did, this behavior will never stop. You'll keep sabotaging. You'll keep manipulating. You'll keep hurting people. Sophie isn't pressing charges to punish you. She's doing it because it's the right thing to do. Patricia looked at me with a mix of hatred and shock. She'd assumed that once confronted, I would back down. She'd assumed that I would forgive and forget. She didn't understand that I had every intention of following through. I'm not dropping the charges, I said calmly. You destroyed my property. You violated my space. You tried to sabotage my wedding and destabilize my mental health. These actions have consequences. The criminal case proceeded. Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney, but the evidence was overwhelming. She was convicted of criminal mischief and destruction of property. She received probation, community service, and was ordered to pay restitution of $92,000, the cost of the dress. More importantly, the conviction was a matter of public record. The Hartwell family, known in their social circles for their prominence and respectability, now had Patricia attached to a criminal conviction for deliberately destroying property out of spite. The social fallout was immediate and severe. Friends of the family distanced themselves. Business associates questioned Richard's judgment about associating with Patricia. Country club acquaintances made cutting comments. Patricia became the woman who destroyed her daughter-in-law's wedding dress, not out of financial desperation or temporary insanity, but out of pure, calculated malice. But my story doesn't end with Patricia's downfall. That's only half of what happened. Giuseppe Mancini, the designer, moved up my dress remake to the front of his schedule. He personally worked on the new dress, and it was even more beautiful than the original. He presented it to me 2 days before my wedding as a gift. He said that what Patricia had done was an assault on art and beauty, and he wanted to make sure that the bride wore something that represented goodness rather than cruelty. The wedding itself was magical. Michael and I stood at the altar, surrounded by our loved ones. His mother was conspicuously absent. She wasn't invited to the ceremony after what she'd done. His father was there, visibly proud of how we'd handled the situation, with integrity rather than revenge. But more importantly, I was there. I was fully present. My anxiety, which had been overwhelming, had shifted into something manageable. By handling the crisis strategically and refusing to be a victim, I'd reclaimed my power. The dress, the day, the commitment, they all belonged to me. Patricia's attempt to control them had failed. In the days and weeks after the wedding, more consequences emerged for Patricia. She lost her position on several charitable boards when organizations learned about her criminal conviction and the circumstances behind it. Major donors to the family's charitable foundation expressed concern about Patricia's involvement, and she was forced to step down from her role as treasurer. Her reputation in the Hartwell family's social circles was destroyed. Michael reduced contact with his mother significantly. He told her that a relationship would only be possible if she acknowledged what she'd done, took genuine responsibility, and underwent therapy to understand why she'd acted with such cruelty. Richard, Patricia's husband, moved into a separate residence. He told me privately that he was considering divorce. He said that this incident had revealed aspects of Patricia's character that he could no longer tolerate. He'd been making excuses for her behavior for 30 years, but he was done. 6 months after the wedding, Patricia filed for bankruptcy. The $92,000 in restitution, combined with legal fees and a settlement with Richard, who did eventually file for divorce, depleted her personal accounts. She lost access to her family's money due to trust provisions that prevented funds from going to anyone with criminal convictions. She was forced to sell her apartment and move into a modest rental. She tried to reach out to Michael several times, but he maintained his distance. He sent her one message: "I'll be willing to have a relationship with you when you've genuinely apologized and understood the severity of what you did. Until then, I can't have you in my life." A year after the wedding, I was pregnant with my first child. Michael and I had bought a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn. My event planning business had expanded. Ironically, the publicity from the lawsuit and the criminal conviction had made me even more sought after. People wanted to hire the woman who'd stood up to family sabotage with grace and strategic thinking. I'd also become an advocate for mental health awareness. I spoke at events about managing anxiety, about the intersection of mental health and major life events, about not letting others' toxicity destabilize your well-being. I'd written articles for major publications about family dynamics and the importance of setting boundaries. Patricia, 2 years after the wedding, reached out to me directly. She wrote a letter, not sent through an attorney, but a handwritten letter. In it, she apologized. She said she'd been in therapy and was beginning to understand her own insecurities, her need for control, and her fear of losing her son. She said destroying my dress had been the worst decision of her life. She said she understood that she'd lost her marriage, her family relationships, her social standing, and her financial security because of her choices. She said she wasn't asking for forgiveness, but she wanted me to know that she recognized the severity of her actions. I showed the letter to Dr. Stevens during one of our sessions. My therapist asked me what I wanted to do with it. "I don't forgive her," I said. "I don't think forgiveness is what this situation needs. But I also don't want to carry anger anymore. It takes energy." I wrote back to Patricia. I told her that I accepted her apology, not as a gesture of forgiveness, but as an acknowledgement of accountability. I told her that the consequences she'd faced were the natural result of her choices, not a punishment I'd inflicted. I told her that I hoped she would continue therapy and build a better understanding of herself. And I told her that I hoped she'd learned that controlling others through sabotage, fear, and manipulation doesn't work. It only destroys relationships and reputations. I also invited her to meet her grandson when my son was born. Not to resume a close relationship, but because I believed that children deserved to know their grandparents, and because I'd learned that holding grudges only poisoned my own peace of mind. Patricia attended the birth of my son, stayed for an hour, held the baby, and cried. She told me that she was sorry. She told me that watching me with my son, seeing the joy and the love, made her realize what she'd thrown away through her own cruelty. I had a son like Michael, she said. And I destroyed that relationship through my need to control him. I'm not going to make the same mistake with you or with my grandson. It wasn't a redemption story. Patricia had consequences for her actions for the rest of her life. She lived modestly. She worked a job managing an estate office, a position far removed from her previous social prominence. She attended therapy consistently. But she also got a second chance at a relationship with her son and her grandson, contingent on her continued commitment to being better. Here's what I learned through this experience. Sabotage reveals truth. When someone acts out of desperation and malice, they expose who they really are. Patricia had been controlled by fear and insecurity for so long that when faced with losing her son, she broke. She committed a crime out of spite. And in doing so, she lost everything. But I didn't get the last laugh by laughing at her downfall. I got the last laugh by refusing to let her sabotage ruin me. I got the last laugh by building a beautiful life with Michael, by thriving in my career, by becoming an advocate for mental health, by choosing to handle crisis with grace and strategy rather than emotional reactivity. I also learned that accountability is more powerful than revenge. I didn't destroy Patricia for what she did to me. I ensured that she faced the legal and social consequences of her own choices. And in accepting those consequences, she eventually became a better person. The wedding dress, the one that survived due to Giuseppe's generosity, now hangs in a museum-quality storage case in my bedroom. It's a reminder of the day I stood in front of the person I love and committed to a future that no one else could control. It's a reminder that beauty is more powerful than cruelty. It's a reminder that the best revenge is living well. If you've been sabotaged by family members, if you've had your important moments undermined by people who were supposed to love you, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and tell me how you reclaimed your power. And don't forget to subscribe.